In a head-to-head shootout, run at the same boost, same timing, and same air fuel. Who makes more power? A Roots blower, centrifugal, twin screw, or turbos? What kind of crazy guy would go through the trouble of running all the different forms of forced induction? A Roots blower, a twin screw blower, a centrifugal blower, and turbos, all on the same motor, same boost, same air fuel, same timing. Who would do that? This guy right here. That's exactly what I did. In this video, we're going to run a Roots blower, a twin screw blower, a centrifugal blower, and turbos, all on a 2004 Cobra crate motor. Now we upgraded the crate motor with cams, put it up on the dyno, ran it NA, then ran all the different forms of forced induction. All at the same boost, same air fill, same timing, so everything was the same. This test will show us not only which one makes the most power, but the different power curves generated by each form. You see, one form isn't the best for all applications. It's nice to be able to choose which one you want. In this test, we'll find out all those answers. So let's take a look at the data and find out what happens. Before we get to the test, remember, this is another opportunity to apply the Holdner Power Boost formula. Now, I've been using this formula since way back in 1990 when I ran my first test for Kip Kington at Turbo Magazine. Back then, I had a Vortech supercharged 5-liter Mustang, which I still have, OG, original owner 5-liter LX. It's a great car, and I'm going to do some cool stuff with it later on. But I still have the car. Back then, I ran a Vortech supercharged 302 on this thing. It was my first opportunity to apply that power boost formula. Now, I didn't come up with the formula. Obviously, people were using it long before I did. Kenne Bell and Gale Banks, and even before those guys with names like Miller and Offenhauser. I mean, everybody knew about this. I'm just carrying it forward. And it's my hope that if you haven't seen the power boost formula, check it out. The video's right here. But it's my hope that people will carry this forward even after me, but have the good character not to take credit for it. I mean, I didn't come up with it. Those guys didn't come up with it. The people before them didn't come up with it. It's basically just the laws of physics. So remember, apply the power boost formula to all these combinations, and let's see what happens. Our first comparison is we're going to run the 4.6 liter 4-valve, basically an 0304 Cobra crate motor that was way back in the day supplied by Ford Racing. And we upgraded it with a set of Comp Extreme Energy, their XE262AH cams, and I'll put the specs up here on the thing so you can see what the specs were. They picked up about 50 horsepower of the cams by themselves over the factory 03 Cobra cams. So we ran those cams, and what I'm going to do is we'll show the power gains offered by each form of forced induction, and we're going to start out with the factory Roots blower, the supercharger that came on the 03 Cobra motor. So we'll show what happened, and we're going to run all of these forms of forced induction basically at the same power level, as close as we can get, and we'll go over it. When we talk about the boost curves, we'll show you what's going on. It's real hard to get them all exactly the same because they're all different forms, they have different pulley ratios, all kinds of stuff. So this was our naturally aspirated 4.6 liter 4-valve 03 Cobra motor without the blower. We ran it with a 2001 NA Cobra intake manifold. Made 425 horsepower and 389 foot-pounds of torque. And here's what happened after we added the factory Eaton supercharger to the mix. Obviously, we replaced the intake manifold. So equipped with the Eaton supercharger, obviously both peak horsepower and torque were up quite a bit. 559 horsepower and 533 foot-pounds of torque. As you can see, nice flat curve, nice good power gain. This was about in the 10-11 pound range, and we'll go over that when we talk about all the different boost curves. So this is the factory Roots supercharger. Now let's take a look and see what happened when we added the Kenne Bell twin screw supercharger. Now that we compared the factory Eaton supercharger on our 0304 Cobra crate motor, we removed that supercharger and installed Kenne Bell twin screw. Now, the Kenne Bell twin screw was a bolt-on deal, so it utilized the same factory lower manifold that incorporated the intercooler, and we ran dyno water through the intercooler on all of these situations except for the Vortech, and we'll get to that when we deal with that specifically. So here is the Kenne Bell twin screw. All of these were run with the same timing. All of these had the same peak timing of about 23 degrees. So here's our Kenne Bell twin screw. Looks like we got a little bit of maybe belt slippage at the very top. And with most of these, especially these bigger blowers like this Kenne Bell, the Eaton was, or the VORTECH was the same way. The power curve is still climbing, so if we would have continued to rev this thing, it certainly would have continued to make power. Or if we would have raised the boost, which we did later on, it definitely would have made more power. But equipped with the Kenne Bell, we were at 617 horsepower and 522 foot-pounds of torque. You can see a nice gain as we expected over the N8 combination. The Kenne Bell works really well. Nice, efficient twin screw design. Generally considered more efficient than the Roots blower, especially of this older design on the factory Eaton used on this 0304 Cobra motor. So the twin screw upgrade worked really well. Now let's take a look and see what happens when we added the VORTECH supercharger. Okay, the last supercharger we're going to test is the VORTECH Centrifugal supercharger. This is the power output of our naturally aspirated 4.6. And here's what happened after we added the VORTECH supercharger. So you can see the centrifugal supercharger has a rising boost curve, and that's what the power curve looks like. So the gains are not as great down low as we saw from the positive displacement stuff. But out at the top, it storms pretty hard and would keep climbing if we'd allow it to continue to rev past 6,500. Equipped with the VORTECH, it made 667 horsepower and 532 foot-pounds of torque. And the fact that the peak horsepower and peak torque both occurred at the same RPM gives us an indication that there's a lot more left if we keep revving this thing. Now, we saw something pretty cool with the VORTECH, and the way that this thing was designed, the way that the kit was designed by VORTECH, is they included a fabricated upper intake manifold that basically bolted onto the factory lower intake of the 03 Cobra motor so that they could utilize the factory air-to-water intercooler. But the problem is that plenum, basically, that was just basically an open plenum with a throttle body attached to it, has no runner length in it. So we did an interesting test later on at a higher boost level, and I'm going to include that, where we replaced all of this fabricated upper intake and the lower manifold and the intercooler with just the Cobra intake. And it obviously has runner length but does not have an intercooler. So that was an interesting test. You'll get to take a look at that in a second after we go through this, and I included that to show you what happens when we do add runner length. We just did it at a different boost level, so it doesn't really compare to the other things. Let's take a look now after running the centrifugal. Let's take a look at the turbos. The final combination on our boost bash here on this 2003 through 2004 Cobra 4.6 liter 4-valve motor was to install turbos. Now, we installed a twin turbo kit from my good buddy Jimmy and Nathan out there at HP Performance in Roswell, New Mexico. They were doing the turbo kits back in the day. This had a pair of 57 millimeter turbos on it. And with this combination, we ran that factory 2000-2001 Cobra intake, the same one that we ran on the NA motor. It also had an air-to-air intercooler as opposed to the air-to-water used on the other supercharger stuff. So again, this is our NA 4.6 liter low compression deal. Man, we beat the heck out of this motor, and I have to say, it kept going. I never looked at ring gap, I never looked at anything. And we ran this thing all the way up over 1,000 horsepower on a number of times. So here is our HP twin turbo kit with the two 57 millimeter turbos. Peak power was 750 horsepower, 749.9, and peak torque was 679 foot-pounds of torque. As you can see, big torque from this thing. Plenty of power. The turbo kit did really well in this combination. And again, we did not use the factory air-to-water intercooler. We used an air-to-air on this. And we tried to keep the boost even with the other superchargers. Now that we've taken a look at these combinations, we really need to compare them. So let's start by taking a look at the boost curves of each one, and then we'll take a look at the power curves of each one. That should give us an idea what's going on. But before that, I want to jump back right now to the VORTECH thing that we ran at a higher boost level and show you what happens when we change the intake manifold, because this is stuff we find out while we're testing. There's other stuff that happens that we learn from. This was pretty cool. This is a test we ran when we had the VORTECH supercharger on our 0304 Cobra crate motor. And we had turned the boost up quite a bit. This was in the 16, 17 pound range. And the combination was making 758 horsepower and 615 foot-pounds of torque. That's not really that important for this comparison, but I want to show you what happened. This is we were running the supercharger and blowing through the fabricated upper intake manifold that VORTECH offers, and then blowing into the factory air-to-water intercooler run on that 0304 Cobra combination. Here's what happened when we took that whole assembly out, including the intercooler, and installed the factory 2000-2001 four-valve Cobra intake manifold. Now this combination ran with no intercooler, just the intake manifold. So I want you to take a look and see what happened when we did that. You can see a big jump in power, not just at the peak, which we definitely did make more power. So it made 815 horsepower. Torque was up to 663 foot-pounds of torque. But look what it did everywhere through the entire curve. I mean, it picked up, you know, a solid 50-60 horsepower basically all the way through. And the reason that it did that, there are three things that changed during this test. One is we got rid of the intercooler, which is not great because obviously our charge temperature is going to be hotter and it would be much better to have an intercooler. But when we put the new intake manifold on, there was no intercooler. So that was a strike against it. But what it had going for it is that we had now runner length from that factory intake manifold. And that's what you're seeing here. This whole change in the shape of the curve is from actually having runner length present. Because before, that 0304 Cobra lower manifold is basically just open. There's no runner in it at all. And the fabricated upper intake that they supplied with, that VORTECH supplied with the kit, was again just a common plenum that directed the air to that factory intercooler. So there was no runner length, and now that there was, this shows what a big change runner length has on the effect of the power curve. So it picked up power through the whole thing. So imagine how much better this combination would feel. Now, if we added an intercooler on top of that, this combination would get even better. But it shows the importance of runner length, and it's something that we found out while we were running this test that we had no plan on testing, but it's just the way that it turned out. Sometimes, you know, stuff happens by mistake. It's cool. Okay, to keep things going on this test on our 0304 Cobra motor, we're going to take a look at the boost curves supplied by each one of the different forms of forced induction. We're going to run the Roots blower, the twin screw, the centrifugal, and the turbos, and provide the boost curves for each one. And then we'll follow that up with the power curves that are associated with those different boost curves. So that way you can compare each one of those, and not just as a comparison like we showed before to the NA combination. Now, another point I want to make is that the boost curves supplied by these and the relative power curves can be carried over to any engine family. I mean, a Roots blower acts the same way on this 4.6 liter 4-valve mod motor as it does on any other motor. Same with the twin screw, same with the centrifugal, and same with turbos, as long as you select the turbo sizing correctly. And I know this because I've run this test, which not a lot of people have done. And I've also run this test a number of other times. I also ran this exact same test on a 1.6 liter B series Honda application way back in the day. They didn't have a twin screw application, so I was forced to run it with a Roots blower, a centrifugal, and turbos. And then I did the same thing with a Roots blower, centrifugal, and turbo on a small block Ford 302. And trust me, this is what they do. So on our 4.6 liter Cobra motor, this was the Roots blower. Had a slight rising curve in the middle, and then a falling boost curve, probably because the supercharger sizing was not able to support the power level that we were asking it to support. Now, we could certainly turn the boost up, but it would just kind of elevate this whole curve. Now, obviously, this supercharger, the factory supercharger, was designed to feed the factory power output. Now, they left some in reserve, obviously, but there's a limit to how much you can take these two. So now let's take a look at the boost curve supplied by, we'll compare this to the one supplied by the Kenne Bell. So the Kenne Bell, because I limited the boost to a maximum of, in this case, 11.75 to 12 pounds, I was trying to keep these all exactly the same. But as you see, we had a slight rise on the Kenne Bell, and this is really the best that I could do. This is as close as I could get them all. But because we were limiting the peak boost, because the Kenne Bell had capacity and kept rising, the boost curve kept rising, unlike the Eaton, which was falling, I just have to adjust these pulleys and try to get as close as I can. And because we had to do that with the Eaton, it's showing a much better boost response down low. And the blower guys, the different manufacturers will argue about this left and right. Well, you needed to have the boost the same at the top. That way our Roots blower looks even better. Or you need to limit it. That way the twin screw looks better. You know, I'm not interested in that. This is what we did, and this was the test. This is what the two curves look like. So now let's take a look at the centrifugal. So we'll add the VORTECH to it. Here you can see a big change with the VORTECH. The VORTECH only was making about 2 pounds or so down at 2,500 RPM and was only making peak boost at the very peak RPM. So it has a rising boost curve. You guys let me know. You may or may not like that. You may want the instant boost response of the Roots stuff. We know that VORTECH and Paxton and ProCharger and all that stuff, those guys run really fast, and they certainly did back in the day with these 03 Cobras, and they're still doing it now. So obviously the combination works. And the interesting thing is, if you take a look over here at 6,400 RPM, where the crossover was between the VORTECH and the Eaton Supercharger in terms of boost, you would think that that's where the crossover in power is. Now keep that in mind, because that crossover point is important. What this will show is that the VORTECH combination actually becomes more effective and more efficient than the Roots blower does, and it happens before that boost crossover. So that's kind of cool stuff. Now let's take a look at the boost curve supplied by the turbos. So you can see I try to keep all the boost curves as close as I could. At the load-in point of 2,500, they're making about 4 pounds, and then they come up and start rising up, and by 4,000 we kind of have all of the boost on these 257 millimeter turbos, and then it just carried straight across because that's what we had our wastegate set at, and it worked very well. Now, the other thing to point out with the turbos is that they have kind of an artificial load imposed by the dyno, so this response is probably better on the engine dyno than it would be on the chassis dyno or on the street, so it may tend to favor the positive displacement supercharger combinations even more. Now that we've taken a look at the boost curves, let's take a look at the power output. Okay, to finish things off with our test here on our 0304 Cobra motor, here are the power curves that are associated with the boost curves that I just showed you. This is the Eaton factory Eaton supercharger on the 0304 Cobra motor. That's the horsepower curve. And here is the Kenne Bell. And if you remember if you look back, rewind the video a little bit, you can see that the crossover point for where the Kenne Bell started making more boost than the Eaton was much higher than this same crossover point. This crossover point here is 4,600 or 4,700 RPM. And if you take a look at the boost curve, it was much later than that. What that means is the Kenne Bell started making more power than the Eaton before it started making more boost. So that's an important point, and we're going to see that again right now when we add the VORTECH supercharger. See, didn't make nearly as much down here as the positive displacement blowers, but the crossover point where it started making a little bit more boost than the Eaton supercharger, or a little bit more power than the Eaton supercharger, was 5,600. And if you'll remember, the crossover point for where it started, where the boost was equal, was much, much higher than that. So that combination started becoming more efficient much earlier than we see just just because of the boost. Now, I think that the VORTECH would have been even better if we took a look at the effect of that intake manifold having more runner length. So if we would have run it like we did with the turbos, where we ran that long runner intake and an intercooler, the VORTECH would have shown better. Unfortunately, there's no way to run the other positive displacements with any runner length because they kind of are what they are. They run that factory manifold. So now let's take a look at the turbo. It's our twin 57s from HP Performance. And if you take a look at that, that kind of shows what turbos are capable of. Even though the boost was comparable, as a matter of fact, on the turbo is actually just slightly lower than the others. The combination of having the long runner intake, it had an intercooler, an air-to-air, which we just blew air through in the dyno cell, but it had a very good boost curve, very good response, certainly after 4,000 RPM. But the combination of the runner length and not having parasitic losses associated with driving the blower mean that the turbo stuff made a lot more power than any of the others. I mean, it was by more than 100 horsepower on some of these. And again, all of the air fuel, you know, 11.7, 11.8. Timing on all of these was the same, 23 degrees total. So this is a function of the difference between the, you know, some of this is going to be parasitic loss, some of it is intake manifold also, because that's probably, I would assume 50 or 60 horsepower of this is probably the long runner intake manifold versus the others that don't have that. So here's the test. All the forms of force induction. You guys can pick the one you want and run with it. Let's get to our conclusion. Okay guys, so what's the takeaway from this video? Well, for me, there's a couple things. First off, I like the fact that we have choices. Sure, the turbos look great. There's no parasitic loss, they make the most power, but guess what? Turbos aren't the answer to everything. I mean, look at the factory stuff. They choose that positive displacement Roots blower for a lot of factory applications, and it works well. Helps them reach the power level that they need. Twin screw, even more efficient. Centrifugal, big top end charge, and turbos, obviously, they always work. But I like the fact that we get to choose between all of them. If there was only one choice, there would be no choices. The second thing I like, when the factory builds factory forced induction motors, whether it's a supercharger or a turbocharger, I love it when they do that. Look at all the modern stuff, a new ZR1, a new Shelby, a new Hellcat, all of those are factory forced induction motors. And I like the fact that they do that because it gives us the ability to upgrade them even further. Whenever the factory makes a forced induction motor, they always leave room on the table for us to make the combination even better. Way to go, factory. More and more forced induction motors, that's what we want. I'm Richard Holder, guys. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you guys want to see this applied to a different engine family. LS guys, do I need to run this test on all the LS applications? Let me know. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. Do all that stuff. I'll keep the videos coming. Thanks for watching.